Welcome to another episode of How Positive Are You? I'm David Crow, president of Rethinking AIDS, speaking to you from frozen Calgary, Canada. With me yet again is my gorgeous co-host, Elizabeth Ely in New York City.
Hi, you're too kind.
I can't be too kind. I just speak the truth. Today we have the privilege of talking with Bobby Russell, who has another unique and strange HIV tale to share with us. Briefly, he tested positive in September 2004, just over a month after testing negative. He had at the time serious internal bleeding, so HIV seemed to explain his weakened immune system without looking too far inside him. The problem was, although his doctor insisted the confirmatory Western Blot test, for all its flaws, was positive, it was actually negative. So, for about 8 years, Bobby was on AIDS drugs that had serious side effects. Additionally, he only had relationships with HIV-positive people because he didn't want to be responsible for infecting anyone else. In 2009, there was a negative Western Blot, but the lab worker decided it must be wrong and changed the result to positive. Finally, in 2012, the original negative Western Blot was discovered. But this did not release Bobby from bondage. Now he believed he'd been putting himself at risk for 8 years through deliberate, unprotected sex with HIV-positive people. So he stayed on the drugs in the belief that this would protect him from infection despite the side effects. Finally, in August of this year, 2013, Bobby stopped the drugs and is now suing a variety of doctors, hospitals, and other people because of what they have put him through totally unnecessarily.
Well, yeah, I'm a little bit familiar with this case because I taped a previous episode 71, I believe, called Sue 'Em Now with attorney Jonathan Daly. This interview was well received, and I will link to it from this episode's introductory page. In a nutshell, Jonathan Daly is Mr. Russell's attorney, and he did speak somewhat of Mr. Russell's case, along with some other cases that he has pending and have even settled. So I highly recommend that people go to episode 71 for some background on the legal environment of this. So, David, go ahead. Go ahead. And welcome to Bobby. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you very much for asking.
Welcome.
Thanks for joining the show, Bobby. It's really good to have you with us to give a different perspective from what your lawyer gave, talking more about the impact on your life and your health. Anyway, let's go back to 2004. Why did you test for HIV? I believe you said both in August and September of that year. Did you see yourself at risk in any way?
Yes, I was living in a relationship with a committed partner, and I always did an HIV test on a yearly examination to determine, to make sure that my health was in great shape. I was always, I guess, led to believe that I need to pay attention to my health. And it was just a yearly routine procedure that I had done with the health department in August of 2004 that determined that I was negative for HIV. Because of the profuse bleeding and the weakening of my body, I had made the decision that I would go to seek medical treatment from the University of Kentucky Medical Center, where they had asked if I was at risk, and I told them that I had a test completed about a month before, during August of 2004, and that the results were negative. However, they proceeded to test me again for what they claim is a method that they use for testing for HIV, including a viral load test. So it went from a viral load test on one day to the next day being a ELISA test that returned back with what I believe now could have been a false positive. I'm not really a doctor or scientist, so I don't know this kind of stuff. But I do know that I questioned the results of that test and requested for a Western Blot test to be conducted. And on the 20th of September, that test was conducted, and those results returned back approximately maybe 5 to 7 days later on the 25th or the 27th, resulting in a negative test result, meaning what I felt that I was negative for HIV.
Okay, so you're saying the Western blot in September of 2004 was negative. So why did they tell you you were HIV infected?
I believe that I believe that there might have been a failure of communication between the hospital physician and the first physician that I began treatment with, because I was discharged from the hospital before 3 or 4 days prior to the results of the test being returned back to the hospital.
So the hospital knew that you had a negative Western blot, and what did they tell you?
They've never even explained it to me. They've never contacted me about the test result or nothing. I was assuming now that they would have only contacted me had that result returned back with a positive result and not as a negative result. But because I had asked my very first physician in October for a follow-up initial appointment for the results of the test, and she indicated to me that I was positive, that I need to begin medical treatment immediately. But I questioned it, and she told me that because of me being in denial, that she did not want me to begin treatment because it would ultimately be something that when I start, I would have to adhere to twice a day for the rest of my life.
So they want you to be totally desperate before you go on the drugs, so that even if you hit a lot of side effects, you're going to be so committed that you're going to keep going.
Right.
But let me get this straight. So you left the hospital and you'd been told already that you were HIV infected. But the hospital did not yet have the Western blot back, and it came back negative, but you were not told.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay.
I think I got it straight now.
They had only assumed at the hospital that the test would return back with a positive result.
And that was the result that was given to this doctor that you said you saw in October, and who didn't think that you had it all together. She thought you were in denial.
Right. But she must have got the results of the ELISA test and not the results of the Western blot test.
And she assumed that it was so obvious that you were positive that obviously the Western blot's going to be positive, or maybe she didn't understand the importance, or there could be a lot of different reasons, things we don't actually know.
Let's go over one of the reasons why there might be wishful thinking in a positive direction among medical personnel. They want to think that you are positive because they get paid. They get a little kachingy thing going on. They get paid every time they come up with an HIV positive person. I think that's through the Ryan White Act. I guess there are federal funds and perhaps state funds involved. And it came out recently that some of these places, or at least one of these places in Washington, D.C., is paying people to come in to get an HIV test, because when you think about it, they still make a profit if they're paying them less to come in than what they ultimately net in terms of federal funds. I think this is scandalous. This is horrible.
While I was talking to Bobby before we started this podcast, he said, I believe, and you correct me, Bobby, I'll try to restate it and then you correct me where I went wrong, that as of 2004, the hospital you went to seemed to stop doing Western blot tests, and the number of HIV positive tests that they were getting went up significantly. So several thousand additional cases were diagnosed following 2004 when they stopped doing Western blots or stopped using them as confirmation.
So, David, what were they doing? What were they doing? Just ELISAs? Or he mentioned something involving an initial viral load test, which, as far as I know, is not approved use for the viral load test, but that might have changed. I mean, are they just doing ELISA, or are they combining it with a Western blot these days? What are they doing instead of the Western blot? What kind of test did they do after they no longer did the Western blots with people? Were they just doing ELISAs, or were they doing viral loads and ELISAs? You hinted that you had had an initial viral load, which to me is scandalous. You shouldn't get that test first. How are they doing this?
And the response that they provided to my complaint was that they used their testing methodologies and that they appropriately diagnosed me and immediately placed me on medication.
When they say their methodologies, did they clarify what that meant?
Their methodologies are viral load, an ELISA test, and that's what their methodologies are according to their, I guess, to their standards now. But in 2004, the standard, I believe, would have included a confirmatory Western blot test analysis. However, according to the date that I was told that I was HIV positive was September 18, 2004, and at that time, only a viral load test had been done, and if a result of an ELISA test was done, it would have had to return in just hours because I was still laying in the hospital bed.
So what you're saying is that the flawed methodology that you were given, that is a viral load plus an ELISA and no Western blot.
No, he's saying he only had a viral load before they told him he was positive, and the ELISA would have come back later.
Right, but he said it would have come back almost immediately, right?
But he'd already been told he was positive.
Okay, but I'm just saying, according to, like, looking back, they had a viral load and an ELISA, which they're now saying is what they do on everybody. So there's the scandal right there. At the time, they made a mistake in not doing a confirmatory Western blot, but now everybody who passes through their doors just gets the crappy test protocol that Bobby got. That's become their modus operandi, according to what he just said. That's what I'm sort of like just scandalized about, that they could make this mistake and then say, no, actually, that's our methodology now. And also, I wonder if David knows, have they changed the protocol? Is it now viral load plus ELISA everywhere? Is that what's becoming common?
I'm not for sure about that myself. David, you might know more about that than I do, but I'm wanting to think that because of the new president of the American Medical Association had requested for, I was very sure that the rule has been changed now to only require a viral load and a ELISA test. No Western blot test is required at this time.
I know they've been going in that direction. I have not actually heard that they've changed. I mean, one of the things that kind of shocks me is that they would do the viral load test first, because up to today, and I mean, there's two levels of insanity here, because the first is, of course, using an antibody test to detect the virus, which everybody knows that that's insane, but they've been doing it. But they seem to have said, okay, well, we're going to do viral load as our basic test and ELISA as the confirmation test. And they must have been convincing themselves that the Western blot was kind of unnecessary, which is why they either didn't take it seriously or they got it back positive and said, well, we don't care because we've got positive viral load and positive ELISA. I mean, one of the insane things about the viral load test is, to my knowledge, there's never been a widespread testing of the HIV antibody negative population. What if you tested the sort of the average person, quote unquote average, who are all HIV antibody negative? What if you tested 10,000 of those people? How many of them would come up with a positive viral load? My suspicion is it would be a considerable number. And how many, if you took another 10,000, how many would have a false positive ELISA? So now you're generating more imaginary HIV infections.
Well, that's what they want to do. They get paid every time they do that. And I don't know that the CDC has officially said that the viral load test is an HIV diagnostic test. I thought it was always to be used just to monitor the progress of your treatment.
That's my understanding. It's the FDA that approves these tests, but my understanding is that the viral load tests are all only approved for monitoring the progress of HIV infection.
Yes.
And not for diagnosis.
And if you go back to my interview with Tricia Morrison back in September, she mentioned that she got an email from, I believe it was Roche. It was Roche Diagnostics saying that their viral load test was not intended to diagnose anything. It was to be used after a positive ELISA or Western blot or what have you, a positive diagnosis. It was not to be used to make that diagnosis. They were trying to convince Tricia at the time in Nebraska that, give it up. He's got a positive viral load. But she was like, but he didn't have a diagnosis before then. And Roche confirmed that their test was not to be used in that way. So now it's really shocking that they're starting with a viral load test. I mean, this has got to be a products liability nightmare for these people down the road. Also, I would note that I've read in a paper by Andrew Maniotis that there are serious problems with the Western blot, and that's why they're dropping it in a lot of places, I assume, but that they've actually admitted in several places that the Western blot has problems and is not reliable. So they're quietly shelving the Western blot while doing these strange things around viral load and ELISA that are probably even less reliable. It's just insanity.
Well, there are no reliable HIV tests, so there's basically a shell game that if people find problems with the Western blot, well, we'll do ELISA and viral load, and then people point out there's problems with the viral load, well, we'll go back to ELISA and Western blot, or we'll generate a new test.
Yeah. Well, we used to know, we used to think, but now we know.
Yeah. Bobby, you gave me some numbers for how many HIV positive testers being at the institution that you were tested at. Can you repeat those?
Yes, I'll elaborate a little bit on that. Their information based upon their website at UK for the Bluegrass Care Clinic, they indicate that they have had an increase in patient load by 120% since 2004. And as a result of these numbers of 120% per year, that's like saying at least 120 patients a year. And if proper protocol or testing methods are not in place to make absolutely certain that these steps are followed, then there is that risk. I mean, I don't know I don't know anyone else's health records except for a couple maybe that have told me, but that would equivalent to about 1,200 to 1,400 patients that could have been potentially misdiagnosed because proper protocol methods were not followed.
So were you saying 120% per year increase or 120% over 10 years? I mean, or 9 years?
I believe the website says 120% per year increase of patient load.
And they're proud of that. I mean, that doesn't even count the people they've killed off, right? I mean, those wouldn't be included as an increase. They would be a decrease.
I had a very good friend that always questioned his diagnosis in 2005. And we had discussed it a couple of times, and and it was something that we just really didn't want to hardly talk about at some points, but we discussed it. However, about a year ago, he developed skin melanoma as a result of what I believe now would have been the use of him taking medications for all those years, and as a result, he was withdrawn from the antiretroviral treatment to pure chemotherapy. And he died last February.
Tragic. I mean, you're saying there are thousands of people who this could be happening to, and I was saying because of that statistic of 100, the statistic is patient load. It isn't increase in numbers of people testing positive. It's patient load, which means it's a net. It's net of people who have died. You know, they have new ones minus the old ones who've died off. So your estimate of these several thousand, or a couple of thousand people who that would be over 10 years is probably conservative because it doesn't count the people who have left the system because they've died. It's really mind-boggling.
I have been in this clinic and I have seen, and this is a disease that does not just affect men or even gay homosexual men. It does not. It affects women. It affects children. It affects newborns that are completely innocent. And if testing methodologies are not followed, they're there. The protocols are put in place for a reason and for a purpose. And we're talking about a life. And maybe that's what health insurance is all about right now, is to cut corners as much as possible. But it was my life. And if I was not properly diagnosed then, because I do not know if I'm HIV positive now. I don't know if I was positive then. I don't know. I do not know.
We should remind our listeners that from our point of view at How Positive Are You, which may not be the point of view of this lawsuit or you in general, but we don't believe that there is any protocol that works, no matter how carefully carried out, that would assure you that you have an HIV infection. And in fact, none of these tests claim that they alone provide a diagnosis. And if you, as a patient, write to your doctors and clinics and ask them to clarify that they have actually diagnosed you and how they have diagnosed you, they generally will not answer because they are afraid of lawsuits. That is a fact. There's a program at the Office of Medical and Scientific Justice called Operation Letterhead that does just that for a $1,500 fee, or you can get instructions at the bottom of its erasing the scarlet letter page or something that gives you do-it-yourself instructions. But nobody has been able to get their doctors to go on record saying, I competently diagnosed you. Here's how I did it. So, from our point of view, there is no properly followed protocol. Even if it's properly followed, it's not a real protocol. It's not something they're willing to stand behind. Sorry about my rant, but I'll shut up soon.
Let's go on and talk about the drugs, because that's the other crazy thing, because the HIV test tells you that you're going to die unless you take the drugs, and then the drugs have things like side effects. So let's start, Bobby, by telling us what drugs you were placed on, I believe in 2004, shortly after you were diagnosed.
There's been a different combinations of drugs. I think maybe three different combinations that I had taken from that point. I know that I don't know for sure how that the list goes now, but I do know at one time, I believe I started off with Icentrist and no, I take that back. The first drug that I took was Camavir and Sustava, and then after a few months into treatment, I complained. The side effects to the Sustava was just astronomical.
And what were the side effects on Sustava?
My worst ones that was really bothersome for me was having to, every night that I went to sleep, it was almost like a fantasy land. It was scary. It was literally every night for 2 or 3 years. It was when I went to sleep, I would always dream that I was in a dark place, and I would always fly. I could literally fly just by flapping my arms, and I could fly. And I remember that I always dreamt that I had something really terrible chasing me, but I could always see this little round light in the top of this church. And I don't know if you guys are aware of it or not, but my mother died when I was fairly young. So I always had this feeling that something always told me to go toward the light, and I would be fine. So I would usually fly to this light, and I would wake up. And, of course, it would be morning. So when I woke up, I was wore out because I had flew the entire night. So the loss of the appetite, and then there was the added stress of the social aspects of my disease, my condition that I was trying to deal with on my own personal level.
The social aspects, like, what do you mean by that?
Well, with my family, how to conduct myself in a social gathering among my friends and my family, because this was something that ultimately caused a lot of problems between my only brother and myself. It was hard for him to understand, and we've just recently been able to try to communicate. But I've missed out on a lot of his children's lives. I've missed out on a lot of my life with my family. And through the years, through that decade basically of years, I've had a lot of my family members to pass away, worrying and stressing that I was HIV positive. But when we go back to these medications, though, because of me having such a serious side effects with Sustava, then a decision was made for me to go to Icentrist, Truvada, and AZT. So
lovely.
AZT was the miracle drug. If you're obese and you want to lose weight, the miracle drug. Because I will guarantee you to peel the pounds off, you will be so sick of yourself, of your stomach. It will deteriorate your entire body. It will cause your eyes to sink. Mine had literally sunk in my head. My jaws were sunk. I'd lost a lot of weight, and I just couldn't tolerate it. I just couldn't tolerate that. And then eventually in 2009, when finally the physician, my only physician that I had at that time, I asked her for my confirmatory, and she said she couldn't find it. So we did a Western blot test, which I have reason to believe that it came back negative because someone had told me that they switched it to a positive because they knew I was diagnosed years before. So nobody told me.
To help you out and make sure that you didn't lose your diagnosis.
Who told you that they had switched it back?
This was a lady. She was known as a social worker for the Kentucky AIDS Drug Assistance Program. And in order for you to be eligible for the KDAP or the Kentucky AIDS Drug Assistance Program, what a lot of people refers to as the Limelight Care Program,
right?
It is required for you to have a care coordinator. And this care coordinator had been a care coordinator that I had worked with for several months. And she insisted that I had been diagnosed at the hospital on September 18th. So therefore, she took it upon herself to contact the laboratory and for them to reverse the results from negative to positive.
So she tell you that she did this? And she was
She did.
proud of herself. It wasn't any problem for her to say that.
She told me that I was in such a denial that I really needed psychiatric counseling.
Really? That test results meant nothing, that her psychiatric evaluation of you as in denial meant more than a negative Western blot, which she actually took it upon herself to get the testing company to reverse. And I'm surprised they even reversed that.
I know that it would be hard for anyone to believe because of maybe in sometime around 2009, I thought that I was seriously going crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, I seriously thought that I was losing my mind and I was going crazy.
Well, they were telling you were.
And the things that I was hearing wasn't really making sense to me. And I took it upon myself to start taking notes for myself, organizing my thoughts. And even if it meant taking notes, meant recording contact information to make sure that I'm able to make it to an appointment on the specific time and date, I did that. And it just haphazardly that while I was recording my personal notes, that she explained to me that she took it upon herself.
Really?
So it was recorded.
Real nice lady. Saving you from yourself, because as you said, you were starting to feel a little crazy. Well, she was telling you you definitely were crazy. I mean, that brings up the point of, I don't want to totally interrupt this conversation about what drug you took and what drug you took, but I think we kind of get the idea so far that, each time you had a concern, they might even change the drugs after a point, but I don't think that they took your concerns seriously. Did you take your concerns to them, that you were having these weird dreams at night, these hallucinations, these problems with your family? And what was the response? I mean, did you get any concern, any counseling, and what was the nature of that?
Well, the doctor that had requested for the labs to be done or to be drawn for the HIV Western blot test, she immediately sent me a letter before my next appointment was due because that test was conducted in November, but in the following December, my dad's girlfriend passed away, so I had to reschedule the appointment. And as soon as that I could get in to get the results in person, was supposed to be scheduled in March. But in February, and I believe the date might have been like February 22nd, that physician wrote me a letter and told me that she was sorry that she could no longer be my physician, that she was wanting to focus more with the American Medical Association, and that she was going to turn my medical case over to another co-physician that would continue on with my treatment.
Okay.
But I saw that physician, and he immediately wanted to change the medicine to Oh my goodness, it was just the last medicines that I took. Um,
Uh,
Icentris and Truvada.
okay, but you're saying
Icentris
that,
and
that when
Truvada.
you complained, or even when you didn't complain, that they would change the medication. But were there any concerns about your well-being? What would they tell you when you said, I'm having a little trouble with this, I'm having hallucinations, blah, blah, blah? Did they say, oh, you're just in denial? Or did they say, hey, we've got this great support group you can go to? Or did they say, hey, you know what? We're concerned about that. We're going to change the drugs. I mean, what were some of the variety of responses that you got? Because I assume you complained. I don't assume that you just had 2 years, 3 years of hallucinations every night and didn't bring that up with them.
I complained
What
every
did they
time.
say? Yeah, you complained every
I,
time. So what was
every
their
time,
response?
and I requested for every time I would go in to have labs done, the very next visit, or even a week or two later, I would go back to the hospital and I would get the results of that test.
But you're saying results of tests. I mean, I want to know, what was their response to you emotionally, supportively? Did they recommend any support groups? Did they tell you you were nuts? I mean, what were some of the things that they told you besides test results?
Yeah, they would always refer me or request for me to go to psychiatric counseling, and then they had also requested for me to join their little support group, which I did from 2004 until about maybe 2008.
So what was that like?
A frenzy. It was like a mail pickup site. That's what it felt like. It felt like that when I went, I felt like that everybody in the room was looking at me like a meat market, and that they wanted to take me home.
That they're all HIV positive anyway, so they might as well pick each other up.
Exactly.
What else was discussed in these support groups? Was it supportive of your concerns, or were they trying to get you back into the fold? I mean, what was it?
Well, they would discuss things such as medication adherence or uh, what types of insurance for you to choose, or what type of prescription drug coverage you need to choose, offering all these kinds of silly topics. I don't recall ever being told how to put a condom on safely.
Well, did they tell you anything about hallucinations and how to deal with them, or that you should go back to your doctor and complain? Did they say anything about the main concerns that you had?
No, no, that was never. Things like that was never of a sense of a topic to the support group.
Did you object to that?
No, I wouldn't have objected because it would have been something that would have been very interesting, and to learn how to strategically deal with side effects of medications, because these side effects, say for example, like sativa, I started my wasting, probably the wasting syndrome about that period because I couldn't eat and I started losing weight. So as a result, I get put on Marinol, prenatal vitamins, and I mean, it was just all kinds of stuff. And then like breathing. They would say, okay, well, we know that you probably have COPD now, so we need to do x-rays of your lungs, but we also want to put you on an inhaler, and we want to put you on this other thing.
No matter what side effects of drugs that you have, the solution is always more drugs.
Well, also, he goes to this support group and he can't even talk about this. I mean, when you brought it up, what did they do?
Yeah.
Just quickly change the subject or tell you you were crazy? I mean, what did they do? Did you persist in asking these questions?
I didn't really. It was not really. They never really wanted you to. They never really wanted you to discuss your personal health case. They felt that it was a HIPAA issue. They didn't want you to discuss your own personal thing. They basically provided you a meal once a week or once a month, and you come in and you sit down and eat and listen at different treatment options, like what type of new medications is coming out on the market and what they
Oh,
work
okay,
with.
I
And
get it. I get it. So basically, the drug companies have a route to get their new drugs into the market because they can pay doctors to promote certain drugs. And then those doctors can have these little get-togethers, and they can basically encourage you that, gee, you're not finding AZT so good, but there's this new drug that's come out that's maybe more expensive, so why don't you go talk to your doctor about getting on to that? So it sounds like it's basically marketing.
They're not even listening to the problems with the drugs before they say get on the new drugs. They're not even listening. It sounds to me like you're there to listen and not talk. And you're paid off with a
Exactly.
meal, which is pretty cheap for a brainwashing
Well,
session.
not only that, but they know that if the patients are experiencing side effects and the patient goes to this little talk and they talk about there's this wonderful new drug XYZ that just came out and it's got a really great safety profile and it's blah 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 blah, then they know that a lot of patients are going to go to their doctors and say, gee, I was hearing about drug XYZ and I was told that it would solve all my problems. And so it's kind of a subtle way for the drug companies to do some marketing. I had a list here, I think that you gave me, Bobby, of side effects that you had experienced, and just verify that these were side effects you experienced, and maybe you can say a little bit about the worst ones. Diarrhea and vomiting. You already talked about hallucinations, sweating, flu-like symptoms, left leg and arm numbness, pain, heaviness, felt like you had a stroke, bone pain, and muscle wasting, which you'd already talked about. Does that sort of capture the major side effects that you experienced?
That really does. And then you try to swallow a pill for every one of those side effects, and you end up taking about 13 or 14 different kinds of pills per day, in addition to your antiviral therapy. And then your diet is consisting of pills.
Pills.
Oh my God.
It's pills. It's just not right, and it has to stop. I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but in 2008, some medical records was leaked in the mail. Not really leaked, but the State Department, the Cabinet for Health and Family Services, mailed out documentation to me to re-enroll into their KDOW program. But on the outside of this envelope, it had written specifically that it was from the HIV and AIDS department at the state. And it's in this huge manila envelope that was unable to be fit into my mailbox. So it was left outside into the mailroom of my apartment complex or my condo. As a result, I felt that it was inappropriate.
Right.
And I voiced my opinion to the local media, to NBC News. And Lee seriously done that interview, and soon thereafter, it was learned who did the interview with NBC. And from that point, my life was fairly difficult. And I began seeking alternative treatment methods for the treating of my disease, because I just couldn't. The care was not. It was substandard.
It was substandard because they discovered that you were the guy who gave the anonymous interview?
It was substandard because they would switch doctors all the time. Like I would see two or three doctors. I would see a doctor for 2 or 3 visits, and then they would say, "Oh, I'm resigning," or "I'm moving to North Carolina," or we're going to send you back over to for another position. And that's why this list of physicians is so long, is because every one of these doctors should have checked me.
Right.
When I've questioned them, they should have searched for me.
Right.
Well, that reminds me of a very interesting point. Your doctor back in 2004, you mentioned the AMA at some point, the American Medical Association, but isn't one of your original doctors now a very powerful and influential member of the AMA?
She is. That was the first doctor that I had from the hospital. From when I was discharged from the hospital and was asked to follow up with care at that clinic to get the results of that test, that doctor is now known as Dr. Artis Hoven, and she's currently the president of the American Medical Association.
Well, that's a comforting thought, that somebody who's cutting corners on the diagnosis of HIV, as shoddy as diagnosis is now running the American Medical Association.
Hey, I'm pretty reassured. How about you?
Yes.
That tells you what
sarcastic.
their priorities are, what they reward. I mean, do they get extra points for being these unthinking, uncaring, obeying machines? You don't get promoted that way.
They might not get extra points, but they get extra dollars, and that's what counts.
That's what counts. Yeah. I mean, who
Being
decides?
The friend of Big Pharma.
Who decides who gets to head up the AMA? Does anybody know? I mean, you may not know the answer to this, but do they get voted on? Did somebody appoint them? Do pharmaceutical companies have input? What determines that you get to sit at the top of the AMA?
It's probably an incredibly democratic process on the surface, but my guess is if you have powerful backing from powerful pharmaceutical executives and people highly placed in the government, that the democratic process is going to elect you. And that if you're the outsider who's maybe criticizing the amount of money that doctors are taking from drug companies, you're going to find it really difficult to get votes.
Sounds like a U.S. presidential election to me.
I think it's the same basic thing. And you get the politician that you paid for.
Right.
A way to add to this is that because of me, because of this story going, the original in 2008, because of me voicing my opinion, and as I said, I seeked other medical treatment options. That's when I had decided that I would review the possibilities or sign up for the possibilities of me obtaining my military benefits. I didn't know if I would qualify for my benefits, but it was an avenue worth seeking.
So you are a veteran.
Anything was worth seeking.
So you're saying you are a veteran, so you were seeking military
Yes.
benefits. So what happened then?
Well, they told me they had requested for me to just go to the health department and have an oral quick test done. They told me that they would not. They did. I said, well, what about a blood test? And then they said, we really only want an oral quick test done. And if you test positive for an oral quick, then you have the person that's giving you this test to contact me, and we'll set up an appointment for you to come to our facility. And I said, okay. Well, I went and had the test done, but it was negative.
And what year was this?
The actual date was July 15th, 2009.
Okay. This is when he was seeking military benefits after he wanted some kind of alternatives and some kind of control over his medical treatment, I suppose, and some benefits that would be more flexible.
Right. So now you have a negative or quick test, which is a rapid antibody test. And then what happened? Because eventually you found more information about Western blots, but what was the next thing that happened?
The lady said, Bobby, I know that you have been getting treatment for HIV. There's something seriously wrong. And she's like, I know that you're getting treatment from the Bluegrass Care Clinic, so I'm going to contact your doctor. So she called my doctor, and she told my doctor that she felt that there was a serious problem, that I was testing negative on an oral quick test. And it wasn't just one, but I did 2 oral quick tests, and both of those tests were negative.
Mm-hmm. And those things are notoriously inaccurate. I mean, talk about the other tests. These things are like, I don't know what they're based on, but they're, they keep getting recalled or almost recalled, and then they just call for more testing using them. Strange stuff.
Right.
And you actually tested negative on them. I mean, I was surprised you didn't test way positive on them all the time, because they're very prone to false positives. Yeah.
So anyway, we got 2 negatives. So this Army doctor then said,
the Dr. Hoven, this is again around July of 2009. So then Dr. Hoven said, well, give him a blood test, and let's give him an ELISA test, and let's check his ELISA test. Right. So I did the ELISA test, and when the results came back, I went to the health department because I had an appointment to go in at a specific time to get the results of the test. So I went back, and while I was there, they had a social worker from University of Kentucky to come in to tell me that the test actually came back undetectable, and that the reason why I was positive, but it was undetectable because of me being on medications, therefore suppressing my immune system.
Oh, there we go.
What was undetectable? Because viral load is undetectable, but you said ELISA. So was it an ELISA or a viral load test?
At the health department, it was ELISA.
Yeah, it's just saying it came out negative or something.
You meant negative or non-reactive?
Well, they claimed that it came back undetectable.
Huh.
Oh my God! I don't know if those people even know what they're talking about.
They're mixing up their terminology.
Mm-hmm.
When these courts asked for the documents from the Fayette County Health Department, before the Fayette County Health Department requested for sovereign immunity, they had submitted my medical record from the health department. And as a result, they indicated on July 15th that I had only an ELISA test and that I had a Western blot test, and that is not accurate because there was never a Western blot test done.
Right.
And the person that did the test is actually a really good friend of mine that is very upset about all this. And I've questioned her. I said, did I only have an ELISA test or did I have a Western blot? Which ones was it that you gave me there at your office? And she sent me an email back, in 2009 or 2010, confirming which test I took and what the results of those tests was. But that information does not match what the information was submitted back to the courts for the medical record at the health department.
Which, of course, since the courts are requesting documents, that indicates there might be a lawsuit, which indicates that people might suddenly find stuff that they didn't have before or invent stuff or not provide stuff that they might find to be really embarrassing. So to your knowledge, you actually had OraQuick and ELISA tests, and they were negative.
The ELISA, they like I said, I'm very confident that the test returned back a negative status, okay. But the words that she used to me was undetectable.
Okay. So getting past that, so now you have a bunch of negative tests. You're on medication. So now what happens? Because
I guess I was asking so many questions, various things are happening to me. I would ask for financial support from these programs that were maybe like Part D or whatever parts they are through this White Care program, and I would ask for assistance, financial assistance, to help me with bills or housing or whatever it would be periodically. And at that time, they began refusing to assist me because I refused to go to their support groups. So because of me refusing to go to those support groups when I was getting really sick, really weak, and I wasn't interested. I just wasn't interested in going to some of those silly support group when I was already running the skimpies here. I just found it really hard that they were making my life so difficult.
Right.
So from that point, though, that's when I started reviewing and categorizing my medical records, my documents, scanning things, jotting down my notes, and really paying attention more. But because of me being on these medications, the thought process was really, really hard.
Right. Okay, so when did you find out, this was the dynamite discovery, that you'd had negative Western blots, or that you suspected you had negative Western blots? When did you find that out?
It was about maybe in 2012 or 2013. I'm not for sure exactly. I want to think that it might have been in April of 2012. I would have to look back at my files through the computer to make sure. Yeah. But the thing was that in 2009, before I got that test result, in July 15, 2009, I got the health department gave me the test result indicating a negative result. Well, the strangest thing was that I had been put in such a position at that point that I could not provide for myself any longer, and that I was having to ask for help. And the economy was collapsing and nobody could help. So I felt like I was useless. I made my funeral arrangements in June of 2009, and I meant to commit suicide. I meant to go home for Christmas and have a tragic car accident, and everybody would think, he got killed in a car accident. He didn't die from AIDS. He got killed in a car accident.
Right.
But because of that test returning, me doing the 2 OraQuick tests and them things come back negative, that was really the only thing that saved me. But before I got that test done, I went back to my hometown to make my funeral arrangements. Everything. And while I was home, I went with my aunt to my hometown church, and I just sat there, and I developed a deeper appreciation for my spiritual needs. I had reached the end of my rope, so the only thing that I could ask was for God to provide for me. And if this condition was as a result of my lifestyle or me being crazy and wild and all this kind of stuff, because I'm not saying wild, but I never got married. So I'm just saying that I never. I just felt like that I had not done something correctly, and that, however, my family was becoming really old, and a lot of them were becoming sick and ill, and some passed away. About 7 of them passed away, and I was needing to help them, and I literally just prayed to God. I said, my family needs me, and I will help my family, but you've got to provide for me.
So, Bobby,
I'm not asking for much. Yes.
Bobby, how did God answer your prayer? God doesn't always answer your prayer with an outright miracle and lifting you out of the whole situation. But what was the first thing that God did to answer your prayer? Because I truly believe in prayer, I do, but I believe that the answers to our prayers are not often exactly what we prayed for, but what you did, you were praying a rather general prayer. What started to happen that you believe was a result of that prayer?
I had, while I was praying, I just said, I knew that my family needed me. I knew that my father needed me. I felt that I could be a benefit to my family, and that it was the least that I could do is to help my family. And I only asked for God to have mercy on me, and that if it was really necessary for me to continue treatment, that I only wished that he would provide a way for me to obtain my medicine so that I could continue to live to take care of my family.
Okay. And how did God answer your prayer? How did God answer your prayer? What kinds of things started happening for you?
Well, I came back home, and a day or two later, I went to the appointment at the health department, and the oral quick test was negative. So I'm like, oh, wow. So then I sat at home, and I sat here one night, and it was probably 2 o'clock in the morning. As well as you guys probably know, these medications will keep you awake all night long. But I just said, I really just prayed a thankful prayer, and I said, I'm really needing to know how I can continue on with my medicational treatment. And if it's necessary, please make a way for me. I started reviewing my medical files, and then it was becoming knowledge to me that the Western blot test had never been considered, and it was missing among my files. So I began searching a little bit more, and I realized that I'd never had a positive test nowhere. So the answer was that God told me that I would provide you the medicine if you need it, but you don't really need medicine because you don't even have HIV.
Right. There's your answer.
There's your answer.
But okay, this is where it gets confusing again, because you, even when you accepted that you were HIV negative, you had been having relationships deliberately with HIV positive people because you didn't want to have a relationship with somebody who was negative to risk their lives. And so now you're faced with the fact that you've been having unprotected sex with HIV positive people, and you told me that you wanted to stay on the medication in order to try to make sure you didn't get infected yourself. Is that correct?
Yeah, that was correct. That was, and that was correct for a while here. And I know that I met a person that was very special to me, and I moved from my old apartment or my old condo and purchased a home for us to live in. So we'd lived here for about 1.5 years or something, and then at that time, after living here for a period of time, then last January 2012, or January 2013, it's one of those two periods. I'd have to look at those documents again, but I obtained a copy of the Western blot test from the hospital, and that's when the Western blot test revealed that the actual result was negative for the Western blot, but the physicians had recorded it as being a positive result.
This was a test from 2004.
Yes.
So all this time, from 2004, and now we're 2009, 2010, all this time you'd been assuming you were HIV infected, you'd been taking drugs, you'd been experiencing side effects, you'd been having tremendous social problems. All of these things had been happening to you, and all along there was a test from 2004 indicating that you were, by their own standards, HIV uninfected.
As HIV negative, correct.
So there's your final answer. You'd had a lot of red flags before that, but that's your final answer.
But between the period of I guess maybe at that October of 2011 till maybe December of 2012, I had been involved with someone that had thought that they were, or they are consuming medications believing that they are HIV positive. And because of me not getting the result from the hospital of that negative test result for about 14 or 16 months after getting into my relationship, then there was no more tests done. And now I don't know if I had gotten infected during that period because no other tests have been conducted.
I see. So there's this period of time where even though you might have had this double jeopardy where you have a negative test all of a sudden, which turns your life upside down, but so many months had gone by that if HIV was infectious, maybe by now you're really infected. And so you're right back where you started again. But that did not happen. We've gone quite a while, but there's two things I would really like to get to, and that is a discussion of when you finally stopped taking the medications and also what your lawsuit is about and what it's seeking.
Right. Okay. My lawsuit was filed in August of this year of 2013, and as a result of the lawsuit being filed, the physician's office at Bluegrass Care Clinic had contacted me. Well, I'll take that back. I contacted them and told them that I did not have any more prescriptions left and that I only had maybe a week's worth of medication and that I needed information on how or what pill did I take the last because they did not want to write a new prescription and I couldn't get another doctor. And so they made the decision to stop the treatment and they stopped the medicines. And as a result of them stopping the medicines, the State Department threw me out of the program because they told me that I had to reapply, but I told them that in order for me to be qualified for the program, for the KDOP program, that I must be HIV positive and that if they had an HIV positive test result to provide to me, then I would reapply. So needless to say, they were unable to provide me with a positive test result, rendering me ineligible to sign back up for the program. So that was the reason that the medication stopped. And it's been about 3.5 months now, I guess, or 3 months now that I have been without medicine and probably feel the best that I've ever felt in my entire life, or at least for the past decade.
Now, if they had admitted you back into the program without needing a test or something, would you have continued to take your medications, or was this purely your own choice?
I would have probably continued taking medicines.
See, that to me is scary.
It is scary, but I guess maybe we're talking about my life, and I thought, well, if I've maintained it this long, I can maintain it a little bit longer so that I could get checked out by another doctor. But soon I realized that my insurance was not going to be enough to cover me to go outside the state of Kentucky for treatment or for an examination to determine what really was the problem, even back then. So I'm living on God's grace. So
then you just started feeling better. I mean, I have a friend back home who was sick and she ran out of insurance, and that was when she got better. I wish I could say that people took bold action on behalf of themselves from a firm stance of self-trust, but that doesn't happen in this society. It doesn't happen in this culture. And maybe that's one of the answers to your prayers, was a sign from an insurance company saying, we're not going to do this. We're not going to do this anymore. It's sort of left up to fate.
Now you have more strength and you're feeling better, and you've got a big lawsuit coming up, so you're going to need that strength because it's probably going to take a lot of time and energy to provide all the documents and get through the court case.
I have spoken to 2 of the 3 partners that I've had, and 2 of the 3 is not even really sure that they was ever confirmed. So my point is about this whole lawsuit deal is that I'm used to living on low income. I am. I'm used to it. This is not a factor about money, really. This is a factor about human life. And as you know, there's people that thinking that they have a terminal condition that may not have it, and there's a mother probably waking up tomorrow morning that's going to be sitting at her table, nervous, scared, worried about her child, thinking that her child has contracted a horrible, incurable disease, and she's scared, she's hurt, and it's not necessary. And this stuff needs to stop. If the appropriate testing methods needs to be followed, if protocols were in place, then protocols need to be followed. And if someone's not following it, they are putting people's lives at risk. And it's not just about me; it's about hundreds of other people, if not in this state, but across the United States and in the world. So I made the decision that I felt like that I had nothing else to lose. So I made the decision to stand for what I believed in and for my own personal beliefs and let my voice be heard.
Well, I hope that the court case really does put the emphasis on HIV testing, because I think that if you look at HIV testing in great detail, you realize that there is no such thing as a test for HIV infection, and that none of the tests have been properly validated. And it doesn't matter if you do ELISA plus Western blot or ELISA plus viral load or viral load plus Western blot or whatever combination you want to do, there is no such thing as a validated HIV test. And there's a lot of people being diagnosed with a fatal condition, like you say, based on the prejudices of the people who thought, gee, if we do 2 of this plus 1 of that, and ask for an optical density of this and 3 of these proteins and 2 of that, that's equivalent to being infected. But there's no proof of that.
It's just terrible. But I am going to say this, that I know that there's probably a lot of people are afraid to speak, and they're afraid of retaliation against them. So that's why I've made it a point in my life to stand for those that are weak and that cannot speak for themselves. And if I want, and if they would be, if I would encourage anyone that was, if they believe that they have been misdiagnosed, or even if they are diagnosed as being HIV positive, I would really love to hear from them. Or, I've created now basically a public figure Facebook page that I'm going to launch, and I want it to be a way for connecting individuals with professionals, to literature, to reports, and I want people to really stop and take a really good look at everything, because I think that the public in general is just being misinformed.
Well, hopefully this podcast will help get people thinking about the whole issue of HIV testing, as well as the whole issue of the danger of antiretroviral AIDS drugs. So I can't thank you enough for being with us today to share your gripping story. Beth, do you have any last comments to make before we end this podcast?
I have no further questions, just to say that, it's great that you, Bobby, are going ahead with boldness, with confidence, and helping others, and expressing in that way your gratitude to God. I don't want to, this to devolve into a religious message. God, or whatever you call God, the universe, the patterns that we all live in, and that is truly the answer to your prayer, and possibly a life mission for you that I truly respect and truly think that comes from a long time of suffering. And the message here is that people don't have to suffer, they don't have to submit, that they are not crazy if they're questioning this. And the bottom line is, there's no test. There's none. Even if you're talking about a protocol that was followed, there's no test. And that answers all the other questions. All the other questions about why are you feeling this bad, and why are you ill. You have to go elsewhere for answers to those questions. So it's just tragic that they see you as a statistic. They are public health professionals. They are not individual medicine professionals, I'm convinced. And you've given a very good indication of the individual human cost of this. That yes, there's somewhere around a kitchen table somewhere a family sitting there going, oh my God, someone is dying in our family, and what are we going to do? And I hope that they will listen to this podcast and realize there's hope beyond their wildest dreams and beyond their wildest prayers. So God bless.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that, Elizabeth. Thank you, Bobby.
Thank you, David. And thank you, too, Elizabeth. I really appreciate the time that both of you have taken to speak with me regarding a very important subject that is significantly important not only to me but to many other people, internationally speaking.
Yeah.
It's a very important issue, and it's something that needs to be considered for open discussion for the public to really think about. And I believe that the public would be quite surprised at what information that they can learn from reviewing documents and really exposing themselves to literature beyond their imagination.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thanks to our audience. Thanks to everybody who listens to this show, and please share it with your friends and contacts.
Good night.
And good night.
Good night. I'll see you later. Bye.
Bye-bye.
This has been another episode of How Positive Are You? Thank you for joining us. If you found our message inspiring, please be inspired in turn to give us your thoughts and feedback at info@howpositiveareyou.com, donate funds large or small, and inquire about advertising appropriate products or services on our website. Until the next time, be well, and remember, relax. It's just information.